Okay, the meeting's being recorded. So welcome all. Hi to February 2025 meeting of the Faculty Advisory Committee. Yes, let's begin. So first on the agenda is approval of the minutes. I don't remember whether they were circulated before. They were circulated the morning, but late morning. Let me just open them up very quickly here. And screen share. Okay. Hope this is the right one. Nope. This is the right one. Okay. All right. Can you all see that? I hope that's a yes. All right. Let's just scroll through it really quickly. Hope we've all got a chance to look at it ahead of time. Oh, very simple. Okay. We have movement to approve the minutes.
I move to approve. Matt Keeney.
Second.
Second, Mike Shea.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. The minutes have been approved. Now for the agenda. Now, I do not see, oh, Patrice is here. That's good. I don't see Brooke, but hopefully she will be here also. And let's see if I can, let's hope I'm screen sharing the right one. Yes, I am. Here's the agenda. So approval of past minutes we've done, the agenda. Then we'll have our ACME presentation right at the top so that our guests don't have to wait. Chair and vice chair reports, legislative updates, Charter Oak update, no confidence resolution, the presidential structure change, and old new business. Are there any modifications you see necessary to the agenda? David?
Oh, I'm just an emeritus member here attending as a participant, but I did go to the Finance and Infrastructure Committee meeting yesterday, and I think there were some rather interesting things. I did do the downloads of the slides that were presented, and there was quite an interesting discussion, which I think would be relevant for us here with respect to both the fiscal situation of the universities and the community colleges in terms of surplus and deficit. Also, the question of the reserves, the extent of them, the nature of them, and their potential uses. So that if you wish to have a report on that, I don't know if there was an FAC representative at that meeting, but if not, I'm willing to do that.
Okay. I listened to most of it, to part of it, but I, appreciate that. I'm sure Brendan did also. So if it's going to be part of his report, maybe.
Yeah, I got it.
You got it? Okay.
Yep.
So we can discuss that, but thank you.
That's fine.
Yeah, we appreciate your experience on that committee. All right, so that'll be part of the report and a motion to approve the agenda. And we'll just hope Brooke makes it. Motion to approve.
motion to move.
Thank
I
you.
motion to move the agenda.
Thank you. Second?
Second, Matt Keeney.
Any objections? Any opposed? Okay. All right. So I guess let's get going. Thank you so much to those of you here to present on ACME. I will maybe leave it to you to introduce yourselves as you see fit and take it away. Thanks again. So I don't know if James, are you leading this, or I know, yeah?
I can introduce myself. I think, Kalina, we were
uncertain whether you wanted a presentation, because we do have some data to share if folks are interested, or if you'd like us to give an overview of where the work stands and where we imagine our needs are moving forward. So we can be flexible to meet the needs of this group. But I'm James Gentile. I'm a faculty member at CT State Manchester. I'm one of the co-leads on the ACME work in the English area. And part of this from probably the longest standing employed member of CT State right now who's worked on this particular project. I went to a meeting in 2018, so going back 17 years. 2019, we had that larger all-campus meeting with faculty, and then we've been working on the project for the last 2 years. I began co-leading with Andrew Sotilli, and now I'm working with Rashida Williams, and I'll turn it to you, Rashida.
Hi, my name is Rashida Williams. I am English faculty at CT State Tunxis, and I've been working with James for the past year or so, a couple of years.
Hi, I'm Asia Shavana, and I'm a math professor at CT State Middlesex, and I'm the ACME Math, typically co-lead, but the only math lead as of right now. If anybody has worked with ACME before, Debbie Rumkiss was the longstanding math representative, and she retired on February 1st. So I was working with her for the last year or so. Hopefully she's gotten me up to speed on all the history, but we're glad we have James who knows all of the history.
And up until January, there were 2 ESOL co-leads, but they've decided to step down. They've sort of reevaluated the link between ESOL and the ACME project. So the focus now is that there is a ESOL equivalent to the English 1010 co-rec, but they've also been working on reevaluating their curriculum in the light of 12 campuses and meeting student needs. So that's why we have English and math here today.
So, and James, you said you're willing to present any sort of combination of data. So I'll say, we are some of us have been around, and been talking about this issue since 2017,
Right.
right, wrestling with it for many, many years. There are a couple of folks here who are very familiar, members of discipline groups like CSET, have been members of PA 1240 group, etc. So very, very involved, invested, and informed. But others of us really are newer to the group. Some are university folks who are not dealing with this directly. And this is also a public meeting. And I should say, like, the lens from which it is odd, right, that we're asking, folks developing curriculum to come in and talk to us about the specifics of those course offerings. So I'd say that the lens that we're coming to it from as FAC is that we are advisory to the board. And the board has a responsibility of of making sure that a certain level of accessibility and offerings are available across the state, and of also being made aware of what does and does not exist. I will say, I'll put it in the shorter way, and then maybe we'll get into some more detailed conversation later. But I will say that, the way I would frame it is that we know that we currently have open enrollment institutions, or at least an open enrollment institution in the state. And that is very important when you consider the varying levels of preparedness and the diversity of the number of school districts that we have in the state. We know that the state legislature is currently wrestling with our ability to deal with the special ed needs. We have never properly funded the ECS, the educational cost sharing formula. So there's huge discrepancies between school districts, et cetera. And our job is supposed to be, as the only open enrollment institution in the state at CT State, that we are in fact available to students at all levels of preparedness, right? So that is the kind of lens that we're coming at it from, to make sure that in the shuffle, in the sort of like national conversation about so-called best practices, et cetera, that we do not eliminate that aspect of it. And we used to have a PA 1240 council. It doesn't exist anymore. As far as I know, that statute is still in effect. So, you know, just that's the kind of approach that we're taking. So it'd be really great to hear where you are and how we're ensuring that.
So that said, would you like to pose questions? Would you like us to sort of frame a response to that? The balance between us being an open enrollment institution and the ways in which we see ACME addressing that dimension
I'm
of
happy
our.
to hear a little synopsis from you, just, you know, where you are. You know, there are questions like, you know, what is the phase in? I know that the provost asked for an extension of the phase in once again, right, to 2027 instead of 2025. Is the intention still? So just a little synopsis of what your aims are, the problems you believe that you're responding to, how you intend to address it, etc. Right? Last I knew, the intention, even if we're moving more slowly towards that goal, is to completely eliminate all standalone developmental courses. Is that still the aim? The goal was to do it by fall 2025. I know that the request has been made to fall 2027. You know, those sorts of things. What kind of data have you gathered? What kind of success rates? I did make available to the committee the provost presentation to ASA and the packet, and so on. But you know, I don't know how much all of us have been able to do that. So if you could just give us a little overview, that would be excellent. And then we can go from there. We can ask questions from there.
Asia, do you want to start with the math, and then Rashida and I can go to the English? Because the answer is different. I think that's one thing we've been balancing all this time.
Yeah, so as Jim said, there is a very different aspect to the math and the English. So I'll go back a step to, right, what was PA 1240, right? PA 1240 was trying to limit the amount of time students spent in developmental courses before ever accessing college level courses. So ACME, again, kind of, it didn't take the place of PA 1240, but it came in as kind of a furtherance of trying to reduce those developmental courses. Why do reduce developmental courses? A lot of people have asked that, and it is not a unanimous agreement that developmental courses should go away. I have to say that from you know, faculty that are teaching at CT State. The real reason is because a lot of students get left in the developmental courses. They never make it to see a college level course. They never actually access college level material because they get stuck in those developmental courses. A lot of times the developmental courses are, again, reteaching things that they should have seen prior and that they haven't picked up. So the approach, and specifically in math, along with making those college level courses accessible, specifically through the use of co-requisite support courses. The idea is to have students really engaged in the ideas behind the mathematics and not just the computational aspects. And in math, the elementary algebra developmental education course is very computational and not very concept based or big picture thinking. So that's kind of where, right, what was the motivation behind all of this? And I mean, math is at a particular place. We have cut down on the number of developmental courses that are offered. We still have a very large number. At the same time as we were introducing this requisite model, we also went from having all students take intermediate algebra. That was kind of the standard class for all mathematics students. And again, AMATIC, or American Mathematical Association of Two-Year Colleges, a national organization for teaching math in the first 2 years of college, has made statements about how intermediate algebra does not necessarily serve most majors, most programs of study. So part of ACME was getting rid of that requirement that every student take intermediate algebra and introducing math pathways. now all students have one of three math pathways that they choose depending on their area of study. We have quantitative reasoning, which is typically a more of a liberal arts math, not you don't necessarily need much algebra or things like that. We have statistics, which a lot of the social sciences and business gear towards. As of right now, nursing is also using statistics as their requirement. And then college algebra, which is a higher level algebra class than the intermediate algebra class, and is a basic starting place for STEM majors, for anybody who's going to end up taking calculus. So with the implementation, we just started with these new courses, the new pathway courses, and the co-requisite model in fall of 2023. So this is for a year and a half in. We have looked at the data, and I don't have any data that I want to present today because I feel like the math data especially needs to be taken with a grain of salt. Right now, there is so much movement and so much change that it's very hard to talk about what's happening. We do not feel that placement has been implemented correctly across the board at all campuses. So that's one thing we're struggling with. So looking at success rates based on placement, if we don't think that a lot of students are placed correctly, then trying to analyze their passing rates is a bit misleading. Because maybe there were students in there who shouldn't have been in there in the first place. For math also, we have an issue of there not being uniform assessment across all of the different courses at the different schools. So things are taught at different levels. There's different expectations for the courses. Again, because a lot of these courses have new instructors that have never taught this material before, different ways of coming at things. So the data, while shows some promising ideas, there's a lot of noise in the data. So I'm reluctant to share a lot of the math data for that reason. We are hoping to continue having more students enroll in the support courses. The support courses are taken in concurrently with the college level course and are supposed to help with the skill development that students are missing in those courses. And we're also in math hoping to strengthen the offerings of what we consider the associates level math courses. These are not, they do not transfer as your mathematics requirement to the four-year schools, but they do satisfy the general education math requirements for an associate's degree. So these are 1,000 level math courses that traditionally haven't been offered at all campuses or at all colleges before the merger. So we're really working on trying to encourage those classes to give students another kind of entry level alternative to the developmental courses. So I guess that's my kind of synopsis, and I'll let James maybe give his synopsis.
I think I'm going to focus on the developmental. I'll talk a little bit about the DevEd. I'll turn it to Rashida to talk about the DevEd also and how we imagine addressing that. As Asia said, a lot of this work came out of PA 1240. We saw a lot of success with that embedded model that we wanted to expand. That also required us to limit DevEd to one course. When I began teaching here 25 years ago, at my institution, there were 3 levels of DevEd. It was a sequence that was common at many institutions. Students who placed in the lowest sequence had I think it was like 4% chance of actually getting to and passing 101 at the time. So it wasn't a model that was beneficial to students. We saw limiting the DevEd through the PA 1240 to one course was beneficial, and there was a lot of success data-wise with that embedded model. But I think as we all know, one of the major impulses behind the ACME policy were these significant equity gaps among students. And the KPIs, especially when we looked at individual campuses, were really, appalling. It's the range of success when we looked at students was incredibly low. And that's really something that we're trying to address. And we find that the developmental is a gap. I think, as Asia said, we want the goal of co-rec is to increase the access of students to 1010. If we look at DevEd, and this is particularly true of our Black and Hispanic students, more of our Black and Hispanic students begin in DevEd. For whatever reason, they begin in a DevEd course. They also tend to be part-time. 50% of our part-time students select to take an English course their first semester. Many of our students need 2 semesters to complete this, so delaying it either with a DevEd course or not registering for a course is an impediment. And again, statistically, it's like 20% of our part-time white students will delay, 50% of our Black students will delay taking an English course. And then adding to that, even if a student passes developmental, the chance that they will return the following semester is low. And again, unfortunately, that percentage is even higher for our Black and Hispanic students. So I hope I don't have those numbers wrong, but I know the general trend I'm talking about. So I think part of our goal is to address that gap. Developmental, as it currently exists, doesn't seem to work for students, or there are structural problems with the ways in which students are either advised or registered, or personal decisions they make, or just realities of their lives. They cannot be full-time students that impede their entry into 1010 from the start. And the co-rec model is an attempt to address that. Rashida and I never think that all of those students are going to be immediately ready for a co-rec model. We think that there's a real need for some type of bridge program or transitional support program that the policy describes, in addition to working with high schools that the policy describes, that we currently are not at the point in terms of resources to address. We do think our 3 main goals moving forward are a more refined challenge essay that's operated consistently on all the 12 campuses, developing a summer bridge program or other transitional program for students who don't seem to be prepared for a co-requisite course when they enter high school partnerships and continued professional development. But I want to turn it to Rashida, if you don't mind, Rashida, and have you talk a bit about the challenges we see in developmental classes, especially when we visit them.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've observed is that the rigor in developmental classes is not consistent across campuses, across individual classrooms. And so a number of the students who do go into developmental courses come out still not being prepared for college level English. And so with that, it makes the struggle in all of their other classes more difficult. So I've mentioned this on a number of occasions in different meetings, that, you know, while we have postponed, I think it is absolutely necessary to, at some point, revamp what developmental English looks like, as long as we're going to keep it. If we don't revamp developmental, then we are essentially in the same place. And to me, it seems that some students are being set up to fail. You know, I recognize that on some campuses, developmental works for some students, but from what I've observed, some of the work is too elementary. And I want to make sure that the students who go through developmental courses while they're still here are prepared for college level English. And the worry is that they'll spend the time and the money in developmental and still not be prepared, and then obviously eventually fail, which I don't want to see.
Jen has her hand up. Thank you, Rashida. But go ahead, Jen.
Thank you, Rashida. I completely agree with what you're saying. I just want to say that I think that what I've observed is that when we first heard there would be an elimination of developmental, a lot of people were so disheartened that they gave up teaching it. I know I moved right into comp. I just emotionally had to. I think that also happened at the same time that we had embedded tutors in the 096, and then they got pulled. So I'm wondering, are you seeing this more? Is your statement more of a blanket statement that developmental since PA 1240 has been as inconsistent and problematic, or since the transition when a lot of the longstanding teachers pulled out, that it's been, and the funding got pulled for the tutors? Or do you see a difference? I know none of that was captured, but I'm just wondering. My sense is that 5 years ago, the developmental programs were taught by people who were really their heart's work was in it, right? And I think that shift happened. So I think it's a little complicated, even though I completely agree.
Sure.
And I also think, so I just wanted to throw that out there as like for food for thought.
No, like I also agree with what you're saying, and I do believe, and granted, like my focus on developmental, I think has sort of just newly been realized, right? So I've been working with James on the ACME initiative and policy work for the last year and a half, I guess, and I think only then have I really been focusing on developmental coursework. Yes, I know that the developmental instructors on my campus, we've talked about some of the issues that they've run into, but I'm speaking to what I've seen in more recent years. So, James, I don't know if you have any thoughts about, previous years, but I'm just speaking to what I've seen in the last couple of years or so.
I think, Jen, I think that's a really important observation, that there were a core full-time faculty member who taught DevEd and had a approach to working with DevEd students who've gone to 1010. On my campus, we have one full-time who still teaches the 96, fortunately, and she had taught the 96 earlier. I think another challenge is, as we've made the co-requisite 1010 available to more students, so we've shifted the placement numbers down, right? So we're down to 2.0 or lower. We have a core of students who are probably in greater need in the developmental classroom. Because remember, for most of us, it was like 2.5 or lower. Now it's 1.9 or lower. So I think the composition of that DevEd classroom has changed also. I think that that's related to it. But, I think as Rashida said, it's difficult every instructor is different. I know you always did, I know from your sabbatical work, you did like an intensive workup on each student's particular needs that was really effective. Maybe that's what we need now as we're moving toward students who are less prepared to more individualized help. It's kind of hard if you're in a 3-credit course and there's 18 kids in the course to do that. It's like 96 is different from 90, 93.
Yeah, I don't know. I just want to say one other quick thing, which is that I think we had a lot of great people who retired. So, I mean, Susan Gentry.
That's true.
They're right. And
Right.
people who jumped ship because of the consolidation and various things. So it's a different group than the group that wrote those original developmental outcomes that we all did together on CSET years ago. So, so it's complicated. It's hard to get these snapshots in time as we keep moving the goalposts.
You know what's so complicated, because we keep on looking at placement numbers, and I think we all know it's like the right teacher can help the student. I mean, so much of success depends on the teacher in the classroom. A student succeeds with one instructor and is challenged by another. So, we can look at placement numbers and we can find students below, 1.5 or 1.0 GPA, and somehow they got into 1010 and they passed with a C or better. It's like something happens if they've clicked with that instructor, the instructors found the support they needed, or whatever. It's so hard to say exactly, like identify exactly what each new student needs and what the magic each instructor brings to that student's experience.
But I also think really quickly, I see Mike has his hand up, but I
Okay.
do want to speak to what you're saying, James, because I also realize, and James mentioned this, and the things that we feel like we need in order for this to go forward successfully is professional development. And I've talked about this a lot.
Yeah.
Yes, there are certain students who succeed in certain professors' classes, but I feel like we can expand that if we have the proper professional development for all instructors. You know, it does feel necessary, especially now that we have additional professional development, especially considering we have so many more students who are neurodivergent. We have so many students who have certain needs in the classroom that we are not all equipped to address. So if we have the proper professional development where we are talking about the things that we're seeing in our classrooms and talking about the things that students actually need and making sure that we have the necessary tools to help these students, I think that will allow, you know, a larger number of students to be able to be successful in our classes.
Go ahead, Mike, and then I have a question also.
Thanks. Rashida, I also wanted to echo what Jen was saying. It's really great to hear what you're saying. I'm at Southern, so I'm at one of the CSUs, but you know, we too are basically an open access institution. And I was on CSET for a long time, and also disheartened by the fact that you know, I think PA 1240 had good intentions, but I think it had a terrible outcome in the sense that I think right now, especially, they're just trying to save money. They want fewer courses to be taught for fewer instructors. And I think it's really hurting the students who are less well prepared now than they were back when 1240 was passed. And it was bad enough then that getting rid of the development of courses was just, I think, a big mistake, and not to concentrate on how to make them better and improve them. I mean, I know students were sort of getting lost in them, but that may have been because of teaching issues or something. So I don't know. I just think we're doing the students a disservice, because even the students, James, who go well through a given teacher's class, some classes aren't because the teacher's good, it's because the teacher's overwhelmed. And it's really hard to keep failing people, right? So I say this not about the community college, this is Southern too.
Yeah.
I think we're passing people who aren't ready. And even though the grade says they're ready, they don't necessarily, as Rashida said, they're kind of doomed to not succeeding because they don't read well enough and write well enough to be college level. So I don't know quite what I'm trying to say here, except that it seems to me that I'd rather see developmental ed expanding more again, especially given COVID and the post-COVID stuff. It's just the students are so overwhelmed and underprepared, and I think they need more time and more attention. So I was disheartened when ACME was first started, and I hope that they can kind of restore what they had, because I think, again, Rashida's pointing to the right point, and it's just a question of how to fix that. Seems to me is, I mean, when you say it went down to 1.9, James, we've gone down too. So now you have, you know, supposedly people who are going into the regular composition class who years ago we would have said weren't ready. So I mean, it's just, and then I want to just ask about Asia about the math. Are we saying that high school high school algebra is not, you know, required of our students? I mean, I know some of the arguments are since that they don't need it in their major or something like that, but that's not the point of gen ed. The point of gen ed isn't what's in your major. It's to be a well-rounded thinking person. And you know, I want my English majors to be just as good in math as, you know, an educated college student should be, not necessarily a mathematician. So I just get worried that we're, you know, as we're overwhelmed with underprepared students and don't have the money, we're just making it, I'm afraid we're not producing the citizens we need to produce to have elections turn out better than they have in the past recent. passed. So anyway, so I don't know if anybody has any comment on that, but thank you for letting me say that.
I would love to say something. Asia, I don't want to jump in front of you. If you want to speak first, it's up to you.
Well, go ahead, because I'll address the math issues. Go ahead, Rashida.
Sure. So really quickly, I understand your points. One of the things that really bothers me when I think about this work is that, you know, as James mentioned, many Black and Brown students are the ones who end up in developmental. And, you know, as they are in developmental and they're trying to work toward, you know, a better life for themselves, there's frustration that happens, especially if, let's say, they don't pass developmental. If they don't pass the class, they now have to repeat the class. And so not only does this, minimize their ability to go into courses that require English 1010 or, higher, it also sort of puts this idea in their minds that perhaps they are not prepared for college. And so to me, in thinking about this, it has been very difficult to come to terms with the idea that developmental English and math may go away, especially considering that the majority of the students who end up in those classes are Black and Brown students. They are students who look like me. And so my thought is there a way to help these students move into college level English, math, and then give them the support that they would need in order to succeed in those courses? I recognize that, eliminating developmental really does almost say, if you cannot meet this standard, you do not belong in college. I get that. And that doesn't sit right with me. But I also realize that if we partner with the high school, the area high schools, if we have transitional programming, if we have professional development for our faculty, there is a better chance of the students succeeding. And I hope that that does happen. Now, if we do keep some level of developmental, it would need to be revamped. And so to me, I am okay with keeping some level of developmental if, that is what everyone agrees on. But if that does happen, it can't go on the way that it is currently. It has to really thoroughly prepare students to step foot into the college level courses that they will then take after.
I agree. And again, I think the big issue is resources, right? We just need more resources, smaller numbers of students per class to teach them the reading and writing skills. It's hard. It's not like delivering information in a lecture, right?
Correct.
They make these classes way too big because they're just trying to save money.
That's right.
One of the richest states in the nation. So it's, we really need to increase the funding in public higher ed. But again, I really appreciate your championing this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, if it is a transitional program, then the DevEd should be covered by the state. I mean, as opposed to them using financial aid for the DevEd, if we could convince, and that's one of our goals, that there are these summer bridge or in-semester transitional programs, which under PA 1240 were no cost to students. So we're still preparing them, Mike, without them paying for it. There isn't as much a stigma of being in DevEd. It's a program that they're in to prepare them for college, and they're not paying for it. That, to me, is really the ideal.
Mm-hmm. So I know John has a hand up. Asia hasn't had a chance to respond to Mike yet. But I definitely had a question first, but I also want to respond to what you just said, James. So if I forget, please make sure I do. Go ahead, Asia.
Yeah, so I definitely want to address the idea of, great, are math skills valuable? Yes, math skills are extremely important for our students. The way that developmental ed and math has been taught, it is based on the algebra, the procedure, the algorithm, not necessarily the understanding. And so a lot of times, even people in the sciences, they are like, how do my students not understand these basic mathematical things? And it's because they focus so much on the procedure that there's no meaning to it. It's memorize this. This is how you do this. This is how you do this. And so when they're actually encountering real math issues in the world, in their everyday lives, they don't know what of these tools that they've been given, they don't know which algorithm to apply in this situation. So one of the big reforms in mathematics pedagogy in the last, I don't know, decade or so is a focus on active learning. And the idea of active learning is really getting students engaged in the questions in mathematics and then coming back and filling in, right? Asking what is the mathematical information we need to know to be able to make calculations, to be able to make sense of certain things that are going on. So it's, yes, the algebraic ideas and the ability to deal with algebra are important, but I like to use the example, if a student goes to the grocery store and is trying to compare the prices of two different things that have two different amounts in them, right? They're going to look at that, and it's important for them to understand and be able to figure out which one is better. Is it important that they set it up as a proportional equation and solve for X? No, that's not important, but then having the understanding and the skills to reason. And so those reasoning skills, as opposed to those algorithmic skills, are really what's necessary. And developmental math is not dealing with reasoning skills. It's dealing with algebra, calculation, these types of things. And so the idea of the co-requisite courses in math is that you have the college level mathematical content is being presented, but with the recognition that these students may not have the computational abilities to go back and do the calculations to answer these types of questions. So that's really the power of the co-requisite courses in math. And again, hopefully these 1000 levels in math is that it's how are we applying this in our everyday life? So it is a much more useful idea. And I think if you're able, I teach a lot. I teach with the 1000 level quantitative literacy and the 1100 quantitative reasoning. So the transfer and non-transfer levels of these. And there's a lot of students who come in saying, I'm bad at math. I don't know it. I don't understand it. And it's like, no, they're just not good at arithmetic, or they're not good at memorizing seemingly meaningless algorithms. But when they're able to really think about the ideas, they're able to put things together, and they're able to take a news article, right? Talking about, like, you want them to make good decisions for themselves financially, politically, what's better? So to be able to take what people are saying and then translate it into mathematical ideas that they understand, that's the really important thing. Again, as Rashida is saying, if there is going to be developmental courses sticking around, we really have to focus on changing them so that you're teaching actual usable skills and not just algorithms. Math is important and everyone needs it, absolutely. It's just how do we define math? What are we thinking of as math?
So, so I'll say when I said I had a question, I thought I understood one thing. Let me just ask this clearly. It seems to me, going into ACME, the goal was always eliminating all standalone developmental courses. What I hear is definitely an openness to retaining at least some. But is there commitment either way? Is it still a goal to eliminate as much as is possible, or is there the intention of keeping this? And I just want to, as I think about that, here's my question, because if there's any intention of keeping some of these developmental courses, what I think is striking is that while Rashida is describing a sort of developmental English in need of some serious sort of like coordination, standardization, quality, improvement, professional development, you're also observing it. You're observing something that has been dismantled, right? What you have been observing is a point in time when these developmental courses have been dismantled. The departments that used to house them have been disbanded. And a lot of the people who used to teach them have left. So if there is an openness to keeping that, is there, do you suppose, a need to reconstruct the communities that used to support this? Because I will tell you that when I came to community college, I was struck by the commitment to pedagogy that you find in the average community college professor, but more so like the way that I learned from folks in the developmental departments was insane. Like just talking to you about how like learning, it's so much of it is just psychological, and it's this, and understanding the kinds of hurdles that students have, understanding the number of undiagnosed learning disabilities that pass through our doors every single day. So it seems to me that we have dismantled something over the past few years that we might need to patch back together and then hire people with those areas of expertise, which I think speaks directly to what James was saying, which is that the state should cover it. And what I have seen is that the line item, right, in the state appropriation that addresses our developmental course needs hasn't changed very much in the past decade or so. It's like 10 point something million every single year. And what we're seeing is that there's a need for resources, there's a need for development. And this seems to be a project that the state needs to take on. I can say more about that later, but so is that, so one, is it just an openness to, is it a commitment to keeping developmental? Where are we on that? And then is there a need to reestablish their home then, the home departments that used to deliver them?
Do you want to tackle that? I mean, I'll tackle that.
It's up to you, James.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the intention is, the goal of the policy is that students will place directly in co-rec, or there will be some type of transitional support in high school partnerships that will address their needs
Okay.
prior to entering the college. I see that as the policy goal. Personally, I think we don't know how many of the students will succeed because we have not fully implemented. I mean, that's something that some faculty said at Summit. It came up again at CSET last Friday. There are some faculty who feel you're never going to know until you do it. I personally imagine us having a need for some program for some students, but I imagine it being in that transitional or bridge program structure. So for example, my campus offers English 93 as part of a summer bridge program, that those students, when they enter, are entering into 1010.
Mhm.
That's my vision of it, Kalina.
Okay.
And Rashida, maybe you have a slightly different vision, but I think that's what the policy goal is, and we're not ready to necessarily say it's otherwise.
Okay. Well, so John and James both have their hands up. I will say just very quickly, because we all, sat through a presentation from folks in California. While we have not yet fully implemented and gathered that data, other states have, and it was catastrophic, specifically for the populations that this policy is supposed to help, and is aimed towards creating a more equitable system for. So there is a real question, I think, whether how ethical it is for us to feel that we need to go down that same path again, especially when just on an analytical level, we should understand that it is unlikely to succeed, in the sense that most of the aim of completely eliminating developmental courses came from the statistical correlation between being a full-time student, placing directly into 101, and then being more successful in school, which, I mean, there are many reasons why we would expect that to be true. You know, the goal of placing direct, I understand that there are other reasons that we want to get students through more quickly. But like just on a bare reasoning level, the justifications that were originally presented to us in that all college or all whatever we were calling it meeting, I remember it was at Housatonic, right? Was simply just that there's a correlation between these things, and we understand what that correlation is. So I do think it's worth considering, given that we do have that data, given that we do understand that that it was mere correlation, whether we want to subject our students to that also, right? Because we've seen it elsewhere. And you can respond to that or not, but I want to make sure to get to John and James. Sorry, I've talked too much. Go ahead, John.
No, I mean, this is all great. I almost took my hand down because so many of you have said things much better than I, and Rashida's statement, I think is so important because you got at, I think, what is the core here. I mean, one thing that I'm struck by is that, you know, this has been a huge contentious issue, obviously, and I have so much respect for Rashida and James leading the way on what is very unpopular among many of our colleagues in the elimination or possible elimination of developmental education. And I think you've taken a lot of fire for things that aren't really your fault, that are, you know, the result of, cynical and unfunded mandates and not following through on the promises that were given actually by CT State, BOR, et cetera. But the inequality issue, I think, is really at the core of this. Like, no matter what's, when I hear Jen argue about this, we're all arguing for students who we see struggling, who deserve a chance. And that's what we're all about. And, you know, I just see all of us on all these different points of the debate being deeply committed to this as educators. The inequalities are deep. I mean, the Black and brown students are disproportionately affected, and that makes sense because they are disproportionately represented among the poor and working classes. I work in the second whitest and poorest county in the state, and I see many of the things that you describe happening to students out in Danielson. And then, we also have the racial divide just in this little corner of the state between the Danielson main campus and our Willimantic Center that's struggling along, that was cut a few years back from because of austerity measures, I think. But I just want to kind of acknowledge that, I think if we keep that in mind, many of these conversations can head in the right direction. I do think that we need to hold on to some developmental education. And I've been a big fan. I was a fan of the ALP model. I'm a fan of the cohort model, the embedded tutors. But it will help a portion of the population that has been stuck traditionally or idling in dev ed move through. There are some students who are ready, who might otherwise just be stuck in a multi-dev ed sequence, who can benefit and are benefiting, and it's shown by the data, in being in an embedded course. But there are many students who I think, and I don't mean to say this disparagingly, it is magical thinking to think that they are going to benefit by just placing, like, the answer is, well, they can't make it into college level, so the answer is, let's just move them into college level. Even with the support, they're not going to get the help that they need. I'm all for working more closely with the high schools, but as we've acknowledged, one big problem here is outside our realm of control, and that is the stark inequalities in public education. In that, even public secondary education is a commodity. Can you afford to live in the zip code with the fully funded, robust high school? And so partnering with high schools that are struggling, and they're really struggling now, that I don't see that as being an answer. And I don't see, and I'm all for summer bridge programs, but again, I don't think that the summer bridge programs can offer what, a full-fledged semester or 2 semesters even of developmental education can be. It can't make up for all that loss. And so for now, if we're committed to being an open access institution, I think that we need to have a place for those students who are coming in, who are so unprepared that they are not going to be, prepared by a summer bridge program. We could wait years down the road before we get our act together with the high school partnerships. I think we need to, if we can, just stepping back, from the 30,000-foot view, institute many of these aspects of ACME, including, the embedded model, but preserve those 0960 courses, those courses that are needed for students who are just too far off the mark to benefit from embedded or from a fast tracking into the college level. So sorry, there's a lot that you gave me just sort of thinking about this, and of course, there's a lot more to say. Just one quick thing on Mike's point about the elimination of intermediate algebra. I do worry about that a little bit. I understand, Asia, what you're describing. I agree with everything that you're saying, but especially when we bring up like kind of inequality as being, or as one of the reasons, rationales that is presenting an unnecessary obstacle for student completion. Bob Moses, if you look him up, he was one of the great civil rights leaders. And after the civil rights movement, one of his great contributions to the United States was actually creating coursework in inner city schools throughout the nation that helped students achieve outcomes in algebra. He taught algebra to the students they said couldn't learn algebra. And so sometimes I think we just take away barriers, in the name of equity, rather than saying, well, no, there's a real benefit. We need to help students achieve this, and we can. So I'll stop there so I don't go on my soapbox. Sorry.
I just want to say something really quickly to what you just said, John. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. One of the things that I think is worrisome to me is that the observations that I have had in, going into developmental classrooms is that there is students who are in those courses, many of them have experienced educational trauma before college, right? They've gone through the K through 12 system, and they have experienced educational trauma. So most of them come out of the K through 12 system already feeling as if they cannot succeed in college. And so then if they do get into college and they come into the institution and they are told that they need to take developmental English or math, they get into the class and then there is more of the same. So, and what I mean by that is this. I observed a class recently where the professor was reading to the students the entire class. I observed a professor who asked students to write a summary, and when the students didn't understand, she was like, all right, well, just try, and then we'll see. And by the end of the class, the students still didn't understand. And so to me, I don't want to see these things perpetuated throughout the college years, especially when this is supposed to be a time when students are taking courses that will help them to better their lives. And so I understand completely what you're saying. And I recognize how hard it is to think about letting go of developmental. And that is why I continuously say that there needs to be a restructuring. And, even with some of the instructors that were teaching developmental before, I would love to hear from some of them and what their thoughts are about revamping developmental. What does that look like? Because I have thoughts about what it might look like, but I'd love to hear from other folks who have been doing this for a really long time, who believe that they can change this. Because what we don't want to happen is to go back into what has already been happening. The student population that we have currently has evolved drastically. We're not working with the same students that we were working with, not even 5 years ago. If we consider the COVID years, the students that we have in our classrooms now are not the same students that we had some time ago. So I'll stop there. I have a lot more to say, but I think that sort of addresses what you just said. I hope.
Yeah, it does. I want to acknowledge, I completely agree with what you're saying and the need for professional development, et cetera. I still don't see that equates to eliminating developmental education. That educational trauma can happen in English 1010. I've seen instructors who don't, say, well, just try harder. That's a great example, by the way, of the summary. Just try harder. There is a way to teach summarizing. It's a really important reading, writing skill. And so your notes about the professional development are extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, James, and then Jen.
Yeah, so me, I hope I'm not too long, but the way I'm looking at the situation, I'm looking at a tautology. In mathematics, that means everybody's right. So both sides are right in a sense. Like me particularly, I came from a product of developmental English. Like I remember when I started college, 2009. I mean, I read and write, but to read and write to get into a college, that wasn't there. I'm not gonna lie. So a developmental course at Three Rivers got me transitioned there. So through there, I take my English 101. Now they call it a different name now. I don't know why you call it now, but you call it a different name. And then when I get to 101, that was some serious business. But there, that 101, I liked it because I remember there was like a tutor in the class, and that was good. And but here's the difference back then and now. And this is where I'm gonna go with my, ideology. My class didn't have 20 students. We didn't have 20 students. I barely remember how many we had, but the small amount we had with the tutor and the teacher, we had enough time, and that was really good providing that support. That's where I'm understanding where this co-requisite thing might be working. Because if you do have the adequate resources, the professionalism, the support, yeah, it will work. But when you have a class where you have 20 bodies, 26 bodies, that we have to rethink that. Like, we have to rethink that. Because there is no way that person is going to go around, 20, and in 2 hours is not enough time. We need to rethink that. But in terms of the funding, now that part makes sense because 20 people in there, one instructor, we save money. So you see, we got that going on. But me, I do mathematics. When I did algebra, and I think I remember at Three Rivers, I did algebra, and we had somebody in the class, and there was a time too before I become an instructor there. I was a TA and I was helping another teacher around. But again, we didn't have 25, 28 students. We had a small portion. So that way, when we provide that support, we actually, become efficient. So what I'm trying to say is this. I am in for keeping developmental, and I will say why. Right now at Asdan Talk, I'm facing the past 3 semesters, I've been reading something. A lot of people I'm getting in my class, they not come from high school. They are people that's been out of the game for 10, 15 years. So what are we going to do with these people? that we need to think about that. And in Acme, I don't see anybody talk about that. That's one of my concern right now. What are we gonna do with these people? Because they're not coming of out high school. I understand with the high school, we partnership with the high school and all of that connection, transition, great. I'm happy. But what about the people that's been out for 10 years? I had a couple that was there, was at the game for 20 years. Would they tell them, hey, get out of here, you can't do this, blah, blah, blah. I had to work overtime with that crew. Overtime, because after class, I had to sit with them in my office for another 2 hours. They usually come. Sometimes I had to go on campus on Friday because the tutoring center, maybe they don't have all the patients that we have with these folks. So what are we doing with these kind of people? Since we said we are an accessible institution or something like that, that we really need to think about that one. And then last but not least, okay, with the math one, okay, I said this so many times in CMAC and everything. I completely disagree the fact that we remove intermediate algebra from everything. I disagree with that strongly because algebra is not X's and Y's. It's a way of thinking. We took that away from them. And I said that, but hey, I'm only one person. But at the same time, I do agree making different pathways. Why? Because not everybody's going to take a calculus class. That we got to really think about that. That's where we are really in a tautology phase where everybody's right. But how do we serve the student by providing the accessible courses that they need so that way when they come to college, they can be in the right place? Because not everybody is comfortable sitting in a sex credit class for 3 hours or 4 days a week, however you wanna look at it. So we have to really think about that. So in a sense, I do acknowledge some of this is right, but at the same time, some of it is not helping anybody. So I do agree we should have some developmental courses because it's gonna address some other people. And at the same time, we can have the correct, but how do you keep the both of them when Acme policy says they gotta go? So how do we deal with that? So that was my 2 cents in that.
Okay. Go ahead, Jen.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this will help Rashida, but I wanted to just give you a tiny bit of perspective about because my life's work was in the developmental, and I know about this question of how should it be revamped. I'll just tell you what I think worked quickly. I really worked hard with my colleague to get the National Association of Developmental Education to certify our program, and it was a huge ordeal to do that. And I liked it because it provided a framework of ways that we could think outside of our own understanding. And we worked very closely with our local campus for data collection and felt like our program was really successful prior to PA 1240. The thing that I think was most effective was that we had different levels and students could come in and we could scaffold the reading and writing and get them where they needed to be. And then that got eliminated. Then when we had PA 1240, what we did was we thought, now for the students who can't take the class and pass the first time, let's build them a different version each semester. So we literally built 3 different versions of the course. So every time a student retook, they weren't just retaking the same class. I mean, we went to that level. We differentiated instruction in between the class and we're teaching 4 different classes in every single one of our classrooms. It was highly, highly like organized. And we made sure that we were scaffolding the reading, writing, critical thinking, and information literacy across the entire 15 weeks thoughtfully. Like it was, I don't think I could have done a more coordinated effort of thinking of it from every angle. However, the big issue still continues regardless of whether it was then or now, which is that they haven't been teaching the science of reading in the public schools for so long. There's no phonics happening, right? And so anyone who's dyslexic is having a problem. These students have disabilities. It's not going to change the fact that you can't take someone who cannot read and write at like even a 6th grade level or 8th grade level and really get them through in a semester or 2, 4 years of high school when you also have all the other competing problems with which many of our students, find themselves facing. So it's if we don't accept the fact that the population largely has students with specific learning disabilities, we are not going to be able to just like make these blanket statements, even that if it is the teacher. I'm not saying I'm a great teacher. I'm just saying that I spent over 20 years trying the best I could. And I never, ever had an entire class pass. And I mean, I've had classes where I had the same students 3 times and I threw everything in the world at them and spent so much time. There are some people, but I will tell you this, none of the students who went through my developmental programs, I don't believe left without a better understanding of finding their voice, contributing, being a better member of society in terms of being able to think critically, speaking up for themselves, advocating, reading to their children, and all these other things that a community college is meant to be. And the reason I stepped away was because when I made those very points, the philosophical arguments and the ethical considerations, I was silenced and disregarded at every single meeting after giving this to my life's work. And so I will always step up for students and be on any group to share my expertise. But I do feel as though a lot of collateral damage has been done for the silencing of faculty who were never even given the courtesy in the first place to ask if any of this was a good idea. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Jen.
One last thing. What does all the students says about this? You know, like when they are taking the courses, what do they say about it? Like, this is something like I really want to know. Like, I understand the logic of what we are doing. Like I said, everybody's right. Trust me. And Jen, I was there when you done all the fight because I told you I take some of the class before I even become an instructor at Three Rivers. So I do, believe me, I appreciate the work that you done because I'm a product of it. But at the same time, all those students that taking the those prerequisite courses, when they're taking it, how do they feel about it? Is there some way we collecting data or some sort of like psychological assessment? How are they handling this? Because I'm telling you, with math, it's a whole nother beast. Like it's a whole nother beast. Like with English, how is it? Maybe we need to address that. Do they preferred? Do we ask them? Do they preferred to be like, hey, let me take that this semester, and then after that I will take the next one? Do they prefer that instead? Do we even give them that choice? Because somehow it can be somebody's choice to either take one semester or 2 math at the same time. I remember when I was at Eastern, I was taking 3 math classes at the same time. And that was my thing. I didn't want to take somebody else, like 3, 4 math classes at the same time. I love that. I didn't want to do biology and sociology. But do we ask the student, how do they feel? That, you know, then why they didn't just put them in there? Do we think about
James. So we are, I feel like this is a conversation we've been having for a very long time. And I feel like we still need to continue to have it. But we are so far into the meeting, and I thank you all for staying with us so long and for having this conversation. Here's what I want to suggest. I got some, a nice, very good list of questions in advance of the meeting that we haven't gotten to yet, because I think the kind of responses we might end up having would be really long, and I wanted to just have immediate feedback. I know that I have a list of, if we were to eliminate, and I think it's very clear that the general sentiment across the system, but certainly in this room, is please don't get rid of all of developmental. We have seen what it has done to other states, and it has not been good, right? But if we were to, the kind of data that we think might be collected, and I think James just contributed to, one more thing, right? What is the student feedback? I know there were students who had come through our developmental courses who made a video a couple years ago for the Academic and Student Affairs Committee, expressing how much those developmental courses meant to them and how successful they were after, right? So what I think I want to do is if there's anything else that any of our ACME folks want to say before you go, please do. But what I'll do is I'll circulate this list of questions, make sure it's complete now that we've heard from you a little bit, and the list of the kinds of data that we'd want to get if we were to fully eliminate it, and send it to you and see if we can, because I think they can be answered pretty concisely in writing, and then see if maybe we can continue the conversation if that's necessary, if that sounds good to you. I also want to take a little privilege and just address a couple of things before we go. But James, I see you want to say something.
Just want to say, we have been, to James's question, we have been surveying the co-rec students. So we've surveyed like over 2,000 incoming students, a smaller number at the end of the semester, but 600. We've been matching student impressions. They have actually been very instructive and positive about the course. One of the criticisms we've received, Flynn, is that we're not getting every student to respond to a survey. And honestly, that's beyond us. So I really would want this committee to think about how you could convince faculty to administer the survey. We send it out to every teacher in English who's teaching a 1010 co-rec. We give them multiple formats through which it would be developed, and we're not getting 100% response rate. It's frustrating, but that seems to be something beyond us. So we are all into collecting data. I think especially as English folks, we really value qualitative data as much as quantitative. But any recommendations this committee could give us to get all faculty to actually administer the surveys would be extremely helpful. So I really want to make that pitch.
And to speak on the math has not really done that kind of qualitative analysis with like the surveys and things like that. And it's something we recognize is needed and that we're hoping to be able to implement. Again, it's about having the people and the support to be able to do those things. So we just have to figure out how we're going to make it happen.
And my little point of privilege that I just want to make sure that I just wanted to respond to, because I did say that a lot of the goal of this initially was this idea that the quicker students, the correlation between students going straight into 101, or college level courses, and then success. And that was largely correlational. But what I'm actually hearing from you all is not that, especially you, Rashida, right? Like this, it's concern about the actual experiences of the students who are in these developmental courses, about not just about their getting stuck, but about what it communicates to them, about their level of readiness, their belongingness in the institution, etc. Especially when the group of students that you're in that room with happens to look slightly different from, right, the other group of students or whatever. John makes some excellent points though about the sort of material reasons that happens, because while it is true that what we find is a lot of Black and brown students, overwhelmingly are disproportionately placed into that, we know that the real issue is disinvestment and wealth gaps, and the way our tax system is structured, and the way our education system is structured, the fact that we don't fund the educational system, the educational cost sharing, the fact that we haven't addressed the needs of students with disabilities and special ed. And this is all very evident to us. So the flip side of the thought that, it does harm to students to even be placed in this, is that what I worry about is that the very types of students who get placed there, and I would hope that we collect more data, not just about race, but about wealth, about school district, about educational history in their family, etc. Because the populations that we're talking about happen to look a certain way, but they also are simply communities in which there is great disinvestment. That happens in rural areas also, it happens in urban areas, it happens in areas with lots of immigrants. So it is a material thing, and it is the state's responsibility to respond to the material harm that it has done to certain communities. And what I worry is that in our not acknowledging the needs of the students who are who place the lowest, who are least ready, right? Because those are the ones for whom the co-requisite model does not work, right? Those are going to be the students. Sometimes it has to do with undiagnosed disabilities, etc., right? But those are generally the students that the state has invested in the least or has crippled the most actively through policy, right? In the way that they do things. And that if we don't acknowledge that need, acknowledge the need to fund the interventions that serve them and the students who place higher in the co-requisite models better, right? And press on them to meet that need at every level, K through 12, our partnership with them, and in our institutions, then we are making the problem invisible. We are hiding it for them. And believe you me, they are pressuring us to hide that problem for them because they're not invested in fixing it at all, right? And we are hiding it for them, and then we are withdrawing the very resources that would serve those students, further disinvesting in them again. And they will just disappear. They won't even show up as failures on our books. They will just disappear in the wind, and we won't even know where to find them to address them. So that is the major worry, and I think the kind of worry that we have to forefront when you're talking about FAC, because what we're talking about is services at the state level. And I don't want the people who have always fallen through the cracks to fall through the cracks once again. So, this is the forum, I think, to make as clear as is possible what are the needs and what is the discrepancy in the levels of preparedness we're offering across the state. And what does the state need to address it? Name the need. What will it cost? And how must they address it? And it has to be holistic, and it has to be, it has to be from housing to tax structure to school districts to, educational funding through K through 12. And it's a huge statewide problem. What I'm hearing is a sort of verbiage that suggests that the fact that we are placing, and because we track racial data, it's Black and brown students in these courses as that a mark of failure on our part. It is not. It's a mark of failure on the state, on the level of our whole society and how we deal with folks. And that if we looked a level deeper, what we'd actually find is that it is a wealth and opportunity problem that just happens to hit people of certain races a little bit differently, right? The race is not the causal issue, it's the investment issue. So I would love if this committee could help to be a platform for naming, describing the need, pressuring the state to meet that need in a holistic, systemic way. So that's what I hope. That's the reason I think that we should be having these sorts of public meetings, because it is the responsibility of the state. And like I said, that dollar amount for the developmental stuff has not changed significantly. If we are increasing the co-requisite model, it's going to have costs. If we are enhancing the developmental model, if we're rebuilding what we were forced to dismantle over the past few years, right? It's going to cost. So I would really like us to be able to be the forum for that if that helps. I don't know if you feel fine doing that elsewhere, that you feel like the resources are available. That has never been my experience in the system. So that is my hope in why we're having this conversation, why I hope we'll continue to have this conversation. And I will forward these questions, comments, etc. requests to you after all of this. So anything else? I see you're unmuted, Rashida. Please go ahead.
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to say is just that in addition to the things that you're naming, I mean, what I'm also hearing is the sort of, I don't know, skirting around systemic racism that is inherent in the higher education system and the educational system, period, in the United States. And then also representation in our institutions. There is a lack of representation, especially for the students who definitely need additional help. And those students can also, benefit from having teachers, tutors, leadership that look like them. So I hope that, in addition to pressing, the state, whoever can offer, funding, we also talk about some of the more deeply ingrained issues that I feel like need to be talked about.
Agreed. Yes, and I cannot help myself. I'm such a horrible person. But if you notice, one of the recommendations is to continue to pair the CCS 101 course with these gateway courses because they facilitate so well. But we have come through a process that is so tone deaf that if you go on the Board of Regents site and read the description of that course, it proposes to introduce students to the white middle class norms that will allow them to be successful. So yes, we have a lot of work to do. Go ahead, Brendan.
Rashida, I'm very glad you mentioned that in particular in this moment. And I put in the chat that I just want to acknowledge sort of the huge magnitude of what everyone is trying to solve here, which is an accumulation of impacts on certain communities that have persisted across generations. It seems to me, as someone who's not part of the CT State faculty, that everyone kind of has the best of intentions at trying to make progress on a huge challenge. Just when it comes to the topic of representation, I just wanted to put on the table that right now, management has asked faculty to develop key performance indicators for certain goals and objectives. And locally at Eastern, I suggested one of those should be representation of certain communities in our faculty. In a Senate forum, the response to that was these measures are supposed to be about measures of student success, implying that representation was unrelated to student success. So I hope someone is out there correcting that notion with respect to these KPIs. We absolutely have to capture what I perceive to be as a large gap in representation of many communities in these KPIs. So I thought I would just put that out there.
I mean, the last thing that I'll say, because I know that time is an issue, but the last thing that I'll say, thank you for saying that, because I've been doing some very early research about, the drafting of KPIs and rubrics and course outcomes and things like that. And, the populations of people who normally draft those things and how, they almost sort of miss certain perspectives, considering the majority of the people who draft the KPIs and the rubrics and the course outcomes, there's not a diverse population working on those things. And so that completely eliminates, looking at certain perspectives and certain student populations when you're not really sure, where those students are even coming from, or the background or the history. So yeah, thank you for saying that. I'll be quiet now.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. There are no last words before you go. Thanks again, and we'll be in touch. Hopefully we'll talk again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Took
All
a lot
right.
of notes. We'll be following up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so it's chair and vice chair reports now. I will say that, I usually just report on the things that are most sort of impactful system-wide. And I would say from ASA, Acme was the thing, and we got that, conversation at length. I know that there was a finance meeting yesterday that was, I'm sure Brendan's going to want to present on, etc. I know David's got some stuff from there. I will say at least this, the $14.4 million has finally showed up in the mid-year budget. So at least we located that. But I think that I will mostly just focus on the governor's budget and where we are with that. And I'll say, I know I sent everyone sort of a snapshot of what the governor is offering, and what the system says is necessary. I don't know how much of this was actually covered in the finance committee, Brendan, so let me know if some of this it would repeat that. But I can just let me just share, I'll screen share with you all basically what I sent you. Are you going to be covering a lot of this, Brendan, or no?
Did you share the screen? I don't know what I'm.
No. Okay. Let me go
It's
ahead.
responding to. Sorry.
Yeah, so this is just the screenshot from when Governor sent out his budget, I think. Oh boy. All right. You see that? Oh, no. What? Is that Word that's I'm sharing? I don't know how I started doing that. Okay, hold on one second. Chrome. Right?
Clean, I think you should, go with whatever you want to talk about here, because yeah, we've talked
Okay.
about this stuff a little bit, but
Okay.
yeah.
So yeah, I'll just lay this out for now. Let me just make it a little bit bigger. So, oops, that's not what I meant to do. I meant to zoom. Okay. So let me start with, so the top slide is the CSCU budget request, the official budget request. So they are asking for 551.1 million in the first year of the biennium and 550.8 in the second year. What the governor offered is the screenshot directly below it. You'll see his numbers are 471.7 million in the first year and 485.1-ish in the second year. So there's a good sort of like 100 million difference, 102.4 in the first year between what the system is asking and what the governor is offering, and 87.3 in the second year. But when the system is asking for that amount, they are also taking into consideration this deficit mitigation of about $95 million in each of those years also, right? So they're asking for enough to leave us with a $95 million deficit, and then they're going to ask on top of it. I don't know why they did it this weird and messily. They're going to just ask for an additional 23 and 21. Okay, so really, the system ask is 551 plus 23 and 550 plus 21. A very easy way, we can talk through it in a different way, but basically that gets us to a need of, if you do not accept further expenditure reductions, remembering that in 2023 in November we had like an $85 million deficit mitigation then also, right? So it's been reduction after reduction after reduction. And then these magic reserves that have popped up out of nowhere, which we know are just more invisible cuts, right? It's more money that we're just not spending. So if you don't concede that we should be doing this mitigation, we should actually ask the legislature for the amount that we need that does not leave us in deficit, right? The total number is around $670 million each year. Okay, so that leaves us about 200 million short in each year relative to what the governor is offering us. That's kind of where we are. And that's the simplest, I think, way of going at it. Just saying that the system threatens to reduce us, whether by spending down reserves or by, withholding spending to the tune of about $120 million each year at that ask. So to eliminate that, it would take about 670 million. So this past Wednesday was the Higher Education Appropriations Committee hearing. I think I counted total in terms of, all of public higher ed. There was a little bit over 350 written testimonies. There were 125 verbal testimonies, or at least 125 people signed up. Many of us were there until after 11 at night, and with and happy to be there, right? Because the need is great, and we realize how important it is. So it's amazing that year after year we managed to keep our spirits up in that room until that hour of the night. But also necessary. So that's kind of where we are. And, you know, Approps will present its budget and then they'll negotiate all the way down to the end of the session. And we have to figure out what the state is going to do, given the threats at the federal level and the fact that even if we brought in more money, we might not be able to spend it given our fiscal guardrails. So we'll see where that goes. But those are the numbers as I see them in the simplest to convey version of why the number might be about 670. All right, I think that's it for me, unless I'm forgetting something. But all you, Brendan.
All right, thank you, Kalina. Yeah, I don't have a ton to add to that. AUP kind of settled on a ask of around 630. You know, at this point, you know, what's a 40 million between folks? We arrived at that number because with ARPA funding, it looks like we came in around 610 in 25. And according to the system office, we're still accumulating reserves at 610. But that reserve accumulation is a consequence of cuts that have already happened. So 630 should be able to reverse certain cuts. But you know, the bottom line is it's very difficult to come up with any number in particular because we still lack audited financial statements for fiscal year 24. In almost every other fiscal year, we've received those audited statements in December. And here we are in February, and we don't even know from an audited perspective what happened in 24. And that's a problem. It's hard to sort of describe what you need in 25, 26, and 27 when you don't know the past. So, but the bulk of my presentation was going to focus on a document which I circulated earlier, estimating the return on investment in the in the CSUs. I have a few slides for that, so I just want to share those slides and go through this, primarily because one of the people I think that read the white paper told me it was maybe pushed too much towards economists. So let me just jump into this. Like I said, I think I did circulate this white paper already. There's already a literature, peer-reviewed literature, and also sort of reports out there that show that states are making errors by underinvesting in public higher education. Zhao in 2019 published something entitled "The Consequences of State Disinvestment in Public Higher Ed." He's an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. And there's just an accumulation of negative impacts which take place as a consequence of disinvestment in New England. That's the focus of his work. There's less innovation as measured by patent applications, lower completion rates, greater cost for students. You know, it gets shifted onto students when the state doesn't sort of lift its portion of the responsibility when it comes to public higher ed, and less access. And the way I've started thinking about this, and I'm fairly certain this is exactly the dynamic we have in play in Connecticut right now, is that the bull is running through the china shop, breaking all kinds of things, then looking around and denouncing the people who work in the china shop and complaining about the state of the shop, and then using that as justification to continue breaking things. And this, you know, the asks that we're talking about here, 630, 670, are very much meant to reverse that dynamic. But in the white paper, I asked, what about the CSUs specifically? We know this is a trend in New England, this disinvestment pattern and the losses that it generates. Yeah, so what I do in that white paper is I suggest that $1 spent on our campuses is not actually $1 out the window, right? It's like putting $1 in a savings account or a stock or a bond. The dollar is not gone. It's actually savings. So how is it savings? Well, if you buy a bond, for example, you're going to face a flow of payments into the future. And that is exactly what happens from our students, because when they earn more, they pay more in taxes. And thankfully, because of a joint project between the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Treasury, we actually know how we have measures of how much our students earn once they graduate from the CSUs. And just to kind of explain how that works, now we still do have these two departments, the Treasury Department and the Department of Education. I don't know how much longer I can say those things, but they actually collaborated in this project starting a number of years ago. And basically the Department of Education said, hey, we know here are the Social Security numbers for students at the CSUs. This is for all universities, not just the CSUs. They only have those Social Security numbers for students that qualify for financial aid, but they send those lists of Social Security numbers to the Treasury Department, and the Treasury Department asks the IRS, okay, what did the tax filings look like for these people? How much are they earning? And they provide summary statistics back to the Department of Education in a manner that maintains anonymity to any particular student, any particular taxpayer, and all of this is done with adequate protections for the privacy of taxpayers and students. That is assuming some outside organization like Doge doesn't come into the database and start poking around. That's a relatively recent problem, I suppose. Okay, so what do these numbers suggest? Well, when we compare the earnings of graduates from CSUs right after graduation with high school students of their cohort who do not attend the CSUs but start working right away, we find that in the very first years after graduation, our CSU graduates earn 47% more than their peers who go straight to the labor market. So that is the value proposition, right? Now, we know that not all of the benefits from graduating from CSUs are monetary. We shouldn't lose sight of the many other external benefits that are important. But if you do put on blinders and only want to talk about the financial return to our students, this is the measure we get from that data. Further, the evidence suggests that the earnings premium our graduates enjoy increases over time. And in fact, if we take the total present discounted value of all the additional earnings from a single class year across all CSUs, that amounts to $6.2 billion of additional earnings. Now, the state only spends $300 million a year to unlock this income. That looks like a pretty good deal to me if we just take it dollar for dollar. Now, again, if you want to be narrow-minded and say, look, well, how much does the state get back in terms of these tax revenues? Well, we know tax rates, so we can apply the state income tax rates to that $6.2 billion of additional income, and we find that the state can expect back more than what it puts in. $346 million in additional tax revenue, okay? And that amounts to a 16% return on investment. Now, how can we sort of draw conclusions from all of this evidence? Well, the first thing is that very few people in policy circles, at least, seem to be discussing this kind of thing. They focus on a single measure, headcount, and then use that as an indicator of how it's going. But I'm not really sure enrollment's all that important when we start talking about the fact that the state is getting back every single dollar it invests in our campuses plus more. And in fact, economic principles tell us that if enrollment decreases, then this return should actually increase. This is a very well-established principle we refer to as diminishing marginal return. So what should happen is the state should spend more to bring this return in line with the pension funds. It's pretty clear from the $12 billion, $8 billion that's been flowing to Wall Street over the past 6 odd years that certain policymakers are very enamored with these pension funds and want to put as much money into them as possible. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me when our state universities are offering a higher return than those pension funds. And further, this raises the possibility that one solution to this so-called pension underfunding that we keep hearing about is to grow our way out of it, right? If we increase the tax base by investing in our state universities, we can have the resources to address the challenges which are coming. And that is a win-win for the youngest generation and other generations, right? It's not this zero-sum game we've been forced into, in which our students supposedly have to give up all kinds of resources so that we can put money into pension funds. So that's what I have from this white paper. Thanks for giving me some time to present that. I've circulated this with the so-called FAC and others, and happy to further discuss it, but thanks.
Go ahead, David. And thank you for that, Brendan. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, one of the slides that was presented was precisely on ROI. And I'm not sure that I have it here, but I will send it to Brendan, and he was mentioned. Either it was Chair Gui or the CFO who mentioned that Brendan had done some important work on indicating the ROI. And that was one of the slides that was presented. If you want, I can take about 5 minutes and present some of the others which might be of interest to you. If you agree to do that, just make me co-host, and I will drop that immediately afterwards.
I think you can share. You should be able to share.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Open system preferences. Sorry. WebEx.
Hold on.
If you just take 1 second. Well,
I'm double checking my settings, but I'm pretty sure. Can other folks see the option to share?
yeah, I see the option to share.
Oh,
Okay, I think I've got it now. This is the one. Actually, over here, if you can see it, what I did was just for my own interest, but it's also because at our joint meeting with the Board of Regents 3 years ago, one of the things that I had presented anyways was a suggestion or proposal, if you please, that they increase the baseline for the CSU system by at least 8 to 10% per year in order to deal with both inflation, cost of salary increases, and also some additional investments in order to bring up over a period of time full funding. That was the theme of that particular discussion. But if you look over here, I'm not sure you can see it. What I did was I calculated for 24 and 25. Remember, there were two one-time fundings. One was the ARPA money, and the second was the so-called carryover. So if you look at it for 24, subtracting ARPA and carryover, the baseline was 430. For 25, where the ARPA money was much less and the carryover was 1/2, that number was 441 millions. The proposals in the governor's budgets are 471 for 26 and 485 for 27. So that gives you a rate of increase from 24 to 25 of 2.6%, from 25 to 26 of 6.0%, and 26 to 27 of 2.9%. And that's clearly inadequate to deal even with inflation, never mind salary increases, and never mind additional funds for investment, some of which have been clearly indicated by Colina and others in the previous discussion. If we go over here, I'll go quickly through you'll be able to find these, I guess, in their minutes when they're posted. But I found this very interesting. There's 4 issues. One was the question of revenues and expenditures system-wide and at each of the institutions. The second was their analysis of the overall deficit and surplus for the system. Third thing was reserves, and then staffing. And I'll go rather quickly. if you look at this first slide here, which is this is all their slides, that's the CFO Lloyd Blanchard presented. Revenues system-wide are up by $37 million. And that was largely based on a 4% overall increase in enrollment. Expenditures were down $3 million overall for the system as a whole. And they indicated that the projected result of those two factors were to increase overall the surplus at the system level from 3.9 to $44.3 million. Now that's their calculation. And remember, folks from the OPM were watching this very carefully, and Charlene Casamento was there and asked a number of probing questions. I'm going to go quickly through the other ones. They went through CCSU, revenues up 6.2, expenditures down 2.4. Similarly for Eastern, up 3.8, and expenditures also up 3.8. So that was a strictly balanced, not either a deficit or a surplus. At Southern, 2.2 up, and expenditures up 2.0 for basically breaking even. At Western, revenues 700 up, 700,000, and expenditures down 1 million. So that was also pretty well balanced. For CT community colleges, revenues were up $23.5 million, according to their calculations now, and expenditures were down 9.3. So a projected surplus of $30.6 million. And I'm sure Colina will have a few things to say about using that particular surplus because they are under a board resolution to restore the services that they cut. And if I remember correctly, having listened to one of their meetings, they had restored something like less than $2 million. They always have a few dollars left to do that. Charter Oak is here too. Revenues flat and expenditures down 1.7. This is interesting. This is system office and shared services, and I'll come back to that. Their revenues, apparently they have a revenue stream, which of course we know how they do that. They take it off the top of the block grant and just give it to themselves. And there's been no control over that. That's one of the issues we've brought up on a number of occasions, and it's worthwhile bringing up again when they present this at the board meeting, that there needs to be a board control over how they attribute money to themselves, because they are the only group which can get as much as they want. Their revenues and we're up 1.1.
That we don't know about. They didn't say, did they? Like, it's not external money that they're talking about.
No, it's I don't believe it is. There might be some, but I think the bulk of it is just what they take off the top from the block grant. System-wide revenues up 37 million, expenditures down 3. I mentioned that point before for what they calculate as a $44.3 million surplus. Secondly, I'm going to skip because for time, and I'll forward this to you, Colina, and you can send it to everybody. It'll be in their minutes, which I'll put up next week at any rate. They calculate, of course, their shortfall based on their $550 million request, less what the governor is offering. But there was no explanation of how they got to that number of 550 million. And so I really can't say very much about that. This was a graphic of system budget where the peak that you see at the top, of course, is money coming in from ARPA. System office employees, this was an interesting one because now they call this as system office plus shared services. So they calculate 34 people full-time at the system office, but another 164 who they control through shared services. Where those people are located, whether on Woodland Street or distributed around, I don't know, but that makes for a total of, as they say, 198 central employees. And that's a significant increase from any number which I had previously calculated based on their directory. Of course, that didn't take into account necessarily shared services, but that was usually stable at around 145. Let me add, if I can find it here. I was going to say something about the reserves, and let me just go back and find that. Give me 1 second. It's nothing like death by PowerPoint, especially when it's not your PowerPoint. But at any rate, the reserves are significant. The reserves are around $600 million. And that is a substantial number which is going to be factored into legislator and OPM and the governor's considerations of what can or has to be done.
So
For the
David,
moment,
let's make sure to sum this up really quickly, just because we're getting.
that's all I had to say.
Okay, cool.
And I'll find the graphic for the reserves, but that's important because the question that needs to be asked at the next board meeting is, there is a distinction made between encumbered or designated reserves and undesignated reserves, but they have no explanation of what designated reserves mean. And that question was asked at the meeting by Charlene Casamento, who wanted to know, are some of the reserves encumbered by legal arrangements with covenants, with bondholders and lenders, or is it by board policy, or is it at the university level? The other surprising thing about the reserves is there is a reserve of over $100 million at the system office itself, which makes for a total of not 6 reserves, but in fact 7. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for pointing that out. I mean, there's also this very interesting question of, please remember that we had a, $130 million deficit a year ago. We have massive reserves now, enough to volunteer ourselves to spend them down over the next 2 years, which is one-time money. And I think it's a real question, like, what are those reserves? And Lamont has said that we have trouble innovating. I do not think that that is true. We have innovated our way into a new definition of the word reserves or surpluses. I think they're called cuts. That's what they're called. That's my feeling.
Yeah, here,
but I don't know.
I have the reserves one here now, and I can show it to you. Sorry. Let me do the share thing again.
Just the screenshot. And then I forget.
I'm not even sure what I have there. No, got the wrong one. But I'll just indicate it briefly so you'll have just some vague idea about this, but I'll send it to you as well. The reserves at Central are $118 million. At Eastern, 50. At Southern, 73. At Western, 16. At CT State, 234 million.
Yeah.
Their undesignated reserve is now at 208. That surprised even me because it had been at 100 a couple of years ago. Charter Oak has 11, and the system office has 129. That makes for a total of reserves $634 million. One of the discussions that they had was, what is the percentage of operating expenditures which has to be kept in reserves? And the number they put forward was 40%. And that, I believe at least one person, again, it might have been Charlene Casamento, who asked most of the questions, asked, why does that have to be at 40% for a public agency which has a steady stream of revenue, inadequate though it may be, from the state? It's not like a private business, which may find that all of a sudden there's a 25% tariff on all its raw material and can no longer compete and is going to have to use all of its reserves at one time. And so that was a question also that I think should be asked. So the two questions are restricted versus unrestricted reserves, and the question of the percentage that has to be held in reserves relative to annual expenditures.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Anything else? Okay. So yeah, also, David, though, I just wanted to, when you talked about the percentage increase, you were doing the percentage increase relative to the non-one-time funding. And we know that we would have died without the one-time funding.
Yes.
So the number that they should be increasing from is that, the amount of money it took to keep us from massive layoffs last year, which was apparently 610 was the drop dead, right? That they needed. So if we calculated it from there, it's even smaller.
Yeah, in that case, it's an entirely different calculation.
Yeah.
But remember,
Well,
we had
it's not.
objections when they used ARPA money for not one-time costs relative to the pandemic, but relative to hire people who would continue on a permanent basis. For example, when $28 million of ARPA money was used to hire the 170 or so GPAs, right?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of problems involved in there. I think you're quite correct to bring that up.
Yeah. All righty. Well, thank you. And so the next item is legislative updates. I already talked about the budget and about the hearing. I'll mention 2 more hearings coming up. It's the 25th, right, Brendan? There is going to be a hearing in the Higher Ed Committee. No, did it change again?
Yeah, March 6th, we believe.
Okay, well, that might be good because that might be the same day. So AAUP, well, or rather, there is a bill concerning the CSUs, about expanding PACT to the CSUs. That's going to be in higher ed, probably March 6th. And then there's another bill that's more concerning CT State that has to do with the ratio of full-time to part-time faculty and staff at CT State. It ran in a similar form in 2023. It's running again this year. But it speaks to the need to not just change that ratio, but that funding would be necessary. And that is going to come up either the 4th or the 6th. So we might end up on that. Those both might end up on the same day, which would be very convenient for us. So those are to look out for. And I know, Brendan, you already put the information out about that, even if the date has changed. And when we have more information about the other bill, we'll circulate that also. Okay, so I have Charter Oak on here, but I don't see Brooke. I know Patrice is here, but I don't know if this was something you wanted to take on, Patrice. I think we might have to skip it. Just confirm with me, Patrice.
Hi, yes, I think Brooke said when she sent you a copy, she said she wasn't going to be able to attend. So, you know, I can answer, and I do have to leave at 3:30, but I can answer or respond if you want to. If you want to take it on or you want to table it till the next time, it's fine with me.
It probably makes sense.
You know, a response.
Okay, I think it probably makes sense to table it, if that's fine with you.
That's okay with me. We just wanted to provide, you know, information to Brooke is full-time there, so and she's a program manager, and I'm a faculty.
Okay.
Could I just offer one remark too? There are ongoing conversations in which I believe AAUP representatives are going to meet with Charter Oak representatives. So I'm not sure, like, exchanging documents back and forth is going to be a very productive a way of making progress. I think those conversations are going to be really good. And I'm looking forward to hearing them and participating in that sort of thing. So we're working towards setting up some meetings.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. All right. The next item on our agenda is the vote of no confidence, or the no confidence resolution that was passed by CT State and the chancellor. I know that, oh, I found it. Because Brendan, you had circulated it and I have located it so I can screen share. In a second. So I know we all have this, but I'm just going to put it up so we can discuss it. Oh, wait, no, wrong. So, boom. Okay. There it is. The content is very focused on his sort of personal misconduct, right? So it's about the P card use and the spending and the cards and the living off out of state, etc. And resolved, faculty and staff formally express a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Chang, and call for transparency, accountability, sound financial stewardship. There is certainly a new P card policy in response to this. I think every P card has been withdrawn and is being reassigned. There are new, the way we do things is now slightly different. So let's just discuss. Any thoughts on this? I will express a little, I'll say this. The policy in response to this concerning the P cards is, okay, good, they've responded. What I do find unfortunate is that while we're focused on that sort of more like personal, individual misconduct, there's a whole lot more in terms of, for example, David, you point out, right? Like, where'd that come from? Our institutions. We still don't have a clear idea of how the system office pays itself. We don't have a clear idea of what we are charged and how, in terms of their. So the same person whose judgment has been criticized for use of a card at restaurants, perhaps, and at school businesses. The person who inhabits that office, no matter who that person is, has an entire staff of people who can facilitate any such poor judgment as it concerns the entire block grant of this system, because there is a complete lack of transparency. And to me, that is the significantly bigger issue, and we've been dealing with it for a long time. And that most of the projects that have come out of that office are, major systematic restructures, et cetera. Consider, for example, the documented failure of the implementation of a consolidation, payroll shared services, HR shared services. Be clear, those were all run by the system office, right? By the office of the chancellor. So I think, to me, it is more important to focus on, or not, it's more important. I think it is important to at least also focus on the role itself and the capacity for serious misconduct and failure and waste and fraud and harm, and the scope of that harm when it's not just a P card, but it's the entire damn block grant. Lois, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I can't support this resolution for a number of reasons. One is it doesn't represent the faculty and staff of the CT State because it was never shared with CT State. The Senate itself just voted on its own. And number two, I agree with the fact that as I sent this out to everybody at Norwalk along with the resolution saying, if number one, it doesn't represent faculty and staff of CT State, even though it says it does. And also, if there's any no confidence vote on the topic, it should be against those who are allowing Chang to stay in office in the wake of the damning audits that have come out. It should be obvious that we all have, quote unquote, no confidence in Chang, considering what we now know. And again, additionally, these audits should have gone much deeper into the finances of CSCU and CT State, as none of this was done in a vacuum by one person. Our financial issues are broader and much deeper than those revealed in the limited scope of these audits. And it has to go much deeper. This resolution is faulting Chang for buying steak and wine is ludicrous compared to everything that's been going on in the system with money, and he didn't do it again in a vacuum. Everybody knew he was doing it.
Go ahead, David, and I want to acknowledge that we are definitely losing quorum. So I think it's useful to have this discussion and decide to maybe come back to it with some thought about what and who it is we have no confidence in. I mean, I suspect for me it's the office of the chancellor itself. Go ahead, David.
I agree with you, Kalina. having served on the faculty advisory committee, on the advisory committee for the selection of the then president, now chancellor of the system, I could say a lot more, but I won't, given the time constraints. But I think that Lois brings up an important point. The isolation of the system office from the constituent units, the 4 universities and the 2 colleges, is a major problem. And the relationship between the system office and the board, where up to recently, the board has simply rubber stamped the resolutions proposed by the system office, that's a second problem. And the third problem is that even when they do that, and there's an attached staff report, there's never a report back as to the implementation of what the board has itself just approved coming from the system office. So there's lots of other problems besides just the audit, including, a 29-cent sales tax that was paid on some particular item. I was surprised by the very limited nature of that audit. So I agree that if you want to really get this right, you need to look at the whole structure and organization of the system. We've always, or at least the point of starting from the autonomy and integrity of the constituent units, the distinct missions of the universities and the colleges, right? And a system approach which builds up the system, not from the top down, but from the bottom up, limiting what the system office does to what is advantageous to the constituent units. That should be incorporated in any particular, in any bill of complaints and of no confidence. I'll stop there.
All right, so let's, if there's need to discuss further, let's do it. Otherwise, it will be what it will be. This seems like a pretty straightforward HR issue, but apparently it isn't. So next on the list, I am searching, and I'm actually not clear whether I have seen this or not. It's got to exist somewhere. There is a new president structure for CT State. So we used to have 12 campuses, 12 colleges. The consolidation brought us down to 12, it was supposed to be 12 CEOs, 3 regional presidents. As soon as Medico obviously got rid of the regional presidents, we have, in theory, 12 CEOs, but there's been a hell of a lot of turnover. So now it is a 7 president model and a technically 13 campus, if I understand correctly, model at CT State, where a number of campuses, including 1 satellite campus, have been paired up with each other. So there, I think the one that surprised folks the most might have been Housatonic and the Danbury campus of Naugatuck Valley, which made a little bit more sense when it was made clear that, they're both in the same county. They're both in Fairfield County, and that kind of allows them to exist in a different way, but whatever it is. We can talk about that more next time, as long as we're all aware that that is happening. The understanding is that we are not merging campuses. The stated commitment has been to not reduce offerings, but simply to sort of to just change the leadership model. That's it, right? That's the way it has been presented. So, there's a lot of movement, along with the fact that we've changed the school structure from 6 schools to 4. We are changing potentially a lot of the governance structure. CT State is still very much under construction in terms of its governance and leadership structure. So maybe we'll talk more about that next time if it's necessary, but just be aware that has happened. And then I think the only thing left is, we've been doing so well with our short meetings recently. Old new business. Is there anything we need to chat about or put on the agenda for next time? Okay. Who would like to make the motion?
I'll move.
All right. And we can all move. I don't think we need a second. All right. Thank you all. It was a long discussion at the beginning, but I think hopefully it was worth it. And I'm going to end the recording.